March 1898. The sun disappears below the horizon of Antarctica. It will not return for months. On board a small Belgian ship, trapped deep in the ice, 19 men wait for daylight that never comes. At first, they believe this is temporary, an inconvenience, a delay. They are wrong. By the time the last trace of sunlight fades, the crew of the Belgica has already crossed a line no expedition has crossed before. Not intentionally, they have become the first humans in history to spend an Antarctic winter trapped in the polar night. No rescue plan, no medical preparation, no understanding of what endless darkness does to the human mind, and no way out. The Belgica expedition was not meant to be a survival story. It was conceived as a scientific mission. Ambitious, modern, and orderly, Belgium's first major Antarctic expedition. A chance to claim prestige through research rather than conquest. The ship left Antwerp in August 1897 under the command of Adrien de la Lache. Its crew was international. Scientists, sailors, officers, men selected for competence, not endurance. Among them were two names history would later remember for very different reasons. A young Norwegian first officer named Roald Amundsen, and an American physician named Frederick Cook. At the time, neither man understood what the ice was about to teach them. By early 1898, the Belgica pushed deeper into Antarctic waters than planned. The ice began to close in slowly, not with violence, but with patience. At first, it seemed manageable. The ship was reinforced. The crew believed they could maneuver free once conditions improved. They waited. The ice did not. By March, the sea had frozen solid around the hull. The Belgica was no longer sailing. It was imprisoned. Still, there was optimism. The men believed they would overwinter and escape in spring. None of them had ever overwintered in Antarctica before. No one had. When the polar night arrived, it did not announce itself dramatically. It simply stayed. Day after day, the sun failed to rise. Darkness became permanent. With it came something the expedition had not planned for. Not cold, not hunger, but disintegration. Sleep patterns collapsed. Appetites vanished. Tempers sharpened. Men stopped speaking. Others spoke too much. Hallucinations were reported. Paranoia followed. Scurvy began to appear, not from lack of food, but from refusal to eat what remained. The ship became a sealed chamber of fear, fatigue, and doubt. And slowly, quietly, the expedition began to come apart. It was Frederick Cook who noticed something the others missed. The sickness was not only physical, the darkness itself was killing them. And if the sun did not return soon, many of the crew would not live to see it. March 1898. The sun slips below the Antarctic horizon for the last time. At first, no one marks the moment. There is no ceremony, no alarm, just a quiet realization, hours later, that the light has not returned. On board the Belgian ship Belgica, trapped deep in the ice of the Antarctic Peninsula, 19 men stand on deck and stare into a darkness they do not yet understand. They believe the night will pass. They believe spring will come. They believe they are prepared. They are wrong. The Belgica expedition was never meant to be a survival story. It was planned as a scientific mission, orderly, rational, modern. Belgium's first major attempt to secure a place among the great exploratory nations of Europe. The goal was research, not conquest. Data, not glory. A careful mapping of unknown coasts, ocean depths, weather patterns, and magnetic fields. The ship left Antwerp in August of 1897 amid public excitement and national pride. Newspapers framed the voyage as bold but controlled. The expedition was not supposed to push limits recklessly. It was meant to observe, record, and return. At the center of it all was Adrien de la Lache, a Belgian naval officer in his early 30s, intelligent, ambitious, and quietly driven. He had spent years organizing the expedition, securing funding, assembling a crew, and acquiring a ship capable, at least on paper, of surviving polar conditions. But paper does not feel cold. The Belgica herself was a small vessel by polar standards. Originally a Norwegian whaling ship, she had been reinforced for ice, but was far from ideal. Her hull was strengthened, her engines reliable, her interior cramped and dim. She was not built for permanence. She was built to pass through ice, not be claimed by it. The crew was international: Belgians, Norwegians, Americans, Poles, sailors, scientists, officers, men selected for competence, credentials, and reputation. Very few had experience in polar overwintering, because no one had. No human expedition had ever intentionally remained trapped through an Antarctic winter before. There was no precedent to study, no manual, no institutional memory. Only assumptions. Among the crew were two men who would later become central to the expedition's survival, though at the time, neither stood out as saviors. One was Roald Amundsen, a young Norwegian first officer. quiet, disciplined, observant. He listened more than he spoke. He watched how ice behaved, how men behaved. The other was Frederick Cook, an American physician, charismatic, confident, willing to challenge authority. He had served on Arctic expeditions before and carried a controversial reputation, respected by some, distrusted by others. At the start, neither man expected to be tested. None of them did. By early 1898, the Belgica had crossed into Antarctic waters and begun exploring coastlines south of the Antarctic Circle. Progress was slow but steady. Ice fields drifted past the hull. Pressure ridges cracked and groaned at night. The crew adapted. They took measurements, recorded observations, maintained routines. There was caution, but also confidence. And beneath that confidence, something more dangerous: curiosity. As summer began to fade, de Gerlache faced a choice. The expedition could begin its return north while escape routes remained open, or it could push farther south, deeper into unexplored territory, gathering data no one else had ever collected. The ice appeared navigable, conditions seemed stable. The ship had survived worse, and so the decision was made. The Belgica continued south. The ice did not respond immediately. It never does. It closed in gradually, not with violence, but with patience. Loose flows thickened, channels narrowed, open water disappeared by degrees. Each day required more maneuvering. Each night, the creaking of pressure against the hull grew louder. Still, the ship moved, until one morning, it did not. By late February 1898, the Belgica was surrounded. Not crushed, not damaged, simply held. The sea had frozen solid around the hull. Ice stretched in every direction, flat, white, unmoving. The engines ran, the rudder turned, nothing happened. The ship was no longer sailing, it was embedded. At first, the mood remained calm. The crew believed this was temporary, seasonal, an inconvenience that would resolve itself when temperatures shifted. They calculated distances, angles, potential breakouts. They waited. Days passed, then weeks. The ice did not loosen, it thickened. March arrived. With it came the end of daylight. The sun dropped lower each day until it no longer rose at all. The polar night had begun, and with it, the expedition crossed into a state no one aboard had prepared for. Darkness in Antarctica is not simply the absence of light. It is a presence. It presses inward. It erases time. Without sunrise or sunset, days lose structure. Hours blend. Sleep becomes irregular. Men lie awake for long stretches, then collapse without warning. The Belgica became a closed system, physically and psychologically. The cold deepened. Moisture froze inside the ship. Walls glazed with ice. Breath crystallized in the air. The interior smelled of oil, damp wood, and human confinement. The men retreated into themselves. Small changes appeared first. Conversation shortened. Jokes stopped. Irritation flared over trivial matters. Some men withdrew completely. Others became restless, pacing the decks during the few hours of dim twilight created by moonlight reflecting off ice. Appetite declined, not because food was scarce, but because eating felt pointless. The expedition had brought preserved rations, canned meat, dried vegetables, ship's biscuits. On paper, the supplies were sufficient. In practice, many men stopped eating properly, and with that, something far more dangerous began to develop: scurvy. At first, it was subtle: fatigue, aching joints, swollen gums, bruises that appeared without cause. Several crew members complained of weakness. Others dismissed it as cold and boredom. They were wrong. The disease progressed quietly, undermining strength, judgment, and still, the sun did not return. By April, the psychological effects became impossible to ignore. Men reported vivid dreams or complete inability to dream at all. Hallucinations were whispered about, then openly discussed. Some crew members claimed to hear voices. Others felt watched. One man attempted to leave the ship alone, walking into the darkness without explanation. He was retrieved before he vanished. Another broke down in tears during a routine task and could not explain why. Fear settled into the ship. Not panic, but a constant low pressure, like the ice itself. Captain de Gerlache struggled. He had led expeditions before. He understood command, discipline, hierarchy. But nothing in naval training prepared him for endless night. The men looked to him for certainty. He had none to give. As weeks passed, de Gerlache himself began to falter. He withdrew from social contact. He remained in his cabin for long periods. His decision-making slowed. His authority, once firm, became inconsistent. The ship no longer felt commanded, it felt adrift. It was Frederick Cook who began to speak openly about the real danger. Not the ice, not the cold, the darkness. Cook had observed similar effects during Arctic winters. He recognized the symptoms: depression, lethargy, cognitive collapse. He believed the crew was not simply sick, they were being dismantled by the absence of sunlight, and unless something changed, deaths would follow. Cook proposed something radical. Not a rescue plan, not an escape through the ice, but a change in how the men lived. He insisted that they needed light, artificial if necessary, heat, routine, physical exertion, and most controversially, fresh meat, seal meat, penguin meat, raw if needed. Many aboard resisted the idea. It felt primitive, unscientific, desperate, but desperation was already present. They had simply refused to name it. By May, the expedition was no longer functioning as a scientific mission. Instruments sat unused. Logs went unwritten. The Belgica had become a survival chamber, its occupants suspended between life and collapse, and outside, the ice waited, unmoving, patient. The crew still believed spring would free them. They still believed endurance was enough. They did not yet understand that the hardest part of the expedition had not arrived. Not hunger, not illness, but the moment when hope itself would begin to fracture. By June of 1898, the Belgica no longer resembled an expedition, it resembled confinement. The ship remained locked in ice, surrounded by a flat, endless white that reflected moonlight but offered no sense of distance or direction. The horizon had disappeared, sky and ground blended into a single oppressive field. Inside, the crew was failing. Scurvy progressed unevenly. Some men weakened rapidly, others deteriorated more slowly, but none were spared. Gums bled, teeth loosened. Old wounds reopened. Strength vanished without warning. Men who had once hauled equipment effortlessly now struggled to climb ladders. Cook's warnings were no longer theoretical. They were visible. The turning point came quietly. A sailor collapsed during routine duties and could not stand again without assistance. Another was found shaking uncontrollably in his bunk, unable to explain what he was feeling. Only that he could not make it stop. At this stage, Captain Degerlash could no longer maintain authority through command alone. Leadership shifted, not officially, but practically. Frederick Cook pressed his case with urgency. The preserved rations were not enough. The men needed fresh meat, not cooked, not preserved, but raw. Vitamin loss, he argued, was killing them faster than cold or hunger. Seal meat, penguin meat, anything living. The proposal was met with resistance bordering on disgust. Many of the crew had never hunted before. Fewer still had eaten raw flesh. Some refused outright, choosing hunger over what they viewed as degradation. Cook did not argue philosophy. He argued biology, and biology won. Hunting parties were organized. At first, reluctantly, then with increasing frequency. Seals were located on the ice, slow, vulnerable, unafraid. Penguins stood in groups nearby, curious, unaware. The kills were efficient, clinical. The meat was brought aboard. Some refused to touch it, others forced themselves. Within weeks, the difference became undeniable. Men who consumed fresh meat stabilized, gums hardened, energy returned in fragments. The decline slowed. Those who resisted continued to weaken. Food had become a dividing line. With physical survival marginally stabilized, a deeper problem surfaced. The darkness was still there, and it was winning. Sleep became fragmented beyond repair. Some men slept for 12 hours straight, then remained awake for 2 days. Others drifted in and out of shallow rest, plagued by vivid nightmares. Dreams blurred into waking life. Men reported hearing footsteps on deck when no one was there. Others believed they saw figures moving across the ice, only to realize they were alone. Paranoia spread slowly. Silently, discipline collapsed. Schedules were ignored, orders questioned. Minor disagreements escalated into shouting, then silence. Captain Degerlash, already strained, became increasingly withdrawn. His health declined, his presence diminished, the chain of command fractured. Decisions were no longer enforced, they were negotiated. It was Roald Amundsen who adapted fastest. He embraced routine aggressively, exercise, tasks, purpose. He volunteered for labor others avoided. He observed what stabilized his own mind and replicated it. Amundsen later described this period as education, not in navigation, but in endurance. As winter deepened, the crew accepted an unspoken truth. They were not waiting out the ice. They were trapped by it. Spring might come, or it might not. And even if it did, the ship might remain imprisoned. In August 1898, Frederick Cook proposed a plan that shifted the expedition from passive survival to active resistance. They would cut the Belgica free. Not by waiting, but by force. The idea bordered on madness. The ice surrounding the ship was meters thick, solid, relentless, stretching beyond visible range. No one had attempted such an operation before, not in Antarctica, not with hand tools, not with a weakened crew. But there was no alternative. If they waited, they risked another winter. That would be fatal. Work began immediately. Men carved trenches into the ice with saws, chisels, and explosives. Progress was slow. Each meter required hours of labor. Frostbite was constant. Tools shattered. Some days the work felt purposeful, other days it felt futile. But it gave the men something the darkness had taken: direction. As weeks passed, the trench extended outward, a narrow channel cutting through ice toward what they hoped would become open water. But the ice resisted. Pressure shifted unpredictably. Sections refroze overnight. Cracks appeared where none had existed before. Progress erased itself again and again. Tensions escalated. Arguments broke out over leadership, priorities, and risk. Some believed the effort was pointless. Others feared stopping more than continuing. The crew divided, not formally but emotionally. Those who believed in escape and those who believed they were already lost. One man suffered a psychological collapse severe enough that he had to be restrained. Then, slowly, something changed. The darkness began to thin. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but perceptibly. The sun brushed the horizon again, briefly, weakly, as if uncertain whether it belonged there. The men noticed immediately. It lifted nothing, but it reminded them of something they had nearly forgotten: time. With daylight returning, work intensified. The trench was expanded. Ice was blasted, hauled, and removed. Every ounce of strength the crew had left was committed to the effort. Men worked through pain, exhaustion, and sickness. Stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. By February 1899, nearly a year after being trapped, the trench finally reached thinner ice. Water appeared. Not open sea, but movement. The ship responded. For the first time in months, the Belgica shifted. It was subtle, but undeniable. The engines were prepared, the rudder tested, the crew assembled, not in celebration, but in tense expectation. They had done everything humanly possible. Now, the ice would decide. On March 14, 1899, the Belgica broke free, slowly, violently. Ice cracked and collapsed around the hull. Pressure released in explosive bursts. The ship lurched forward, hesitated, then moved again. Open water spread ahead. After 13 months trapped in darkness, the expedition was no longer stationary. They were sailing. There was no cheering, no relief, only exhaustion. The men stood silently as Antarctica began to recede behind them. What they left behind was not just ice, it was something they would never fully reclaim. They returned north altered, physically weakened, psychologically scarred, but alive. The Belgica expedition did not achieve all its scientific goals, but it changed polar exploration forever. It proved that Antarctica was survivable at a cost no one had yet measured, and it taught future explorers something far more valuable than data: that the greatest danger in the polar regions is not cold, not hunger, not even isolation, but the slow, silent erosion of the human mind. When the Belgica finally returned to inhabited ports, the expedition was officially recorded as a success. The ship was intact. The crew had survived. Scientific data had been collected. On paper, the mission was complete. In reality, very little of what the men carried home could be cataloged. The return to civilization was not a celebration. The crew did not step ashore as heroes eager to speak. Many avoided public attention. Some struggled to resume ordinary routines. Others found themselves restless, unable to sleep indoors, uneasy in crowds, unsettled by artificial light. Months of darkness had rewired them. The polar night did not end when the sun returned. It lingered in memory, in behavior, in silence. Several men suffered long-term health consequences. Scurvy faded, but weakness remained. Psychological scars proved harder to name, harder to treat, and harder still to explain to people who had never experienced complete isolation. The expedition had returned alive, but not unchanged. Captain Adrien de Gerlache never fully escaped the weight of command during that winter. The decisions he made, and those he delayed, followed him for years. His expedition would later be recognized as historically important, but at the time, it was also quietly criticized for its lack of preparation. The Belgica had survived despite its planning, not because of it. Frederick Cook emerged from the expedition with reinforced confidence in his theories about nutrition, light, and mental resilience. His insistence on fresh meat and routine had saved lives. Yet controversy followed him throughout his career, and his later claims would forever complicate his legacy. Still, on the ice, when it mattered most, his instincts had been correct. For one man aboard, the expedition became something else entirely, a lesson. Roald Amundsen did not speak much about the Belgica in emotional terms. He analyzed it. He observed what darkness did to men. He noted the importance of routine, physical movement, and morale. He learned that waiting was often more dangerous than acting. Most importantly, he understood that survival in polar regions depended as much on psychology as on equipment. Years later, when Amundsen led his own expeditions, including the successful journey to the South Pole, these lessons were visible in every decision. Careful preparation, clear routines, a diet designed for endurance, and absolute respect for the environment. The Belgica did not conquer Antarctica, but it taught Amundsen how not to be conquered by it. Historically, the Belgica expedition occupies an unusual place. It was not a triumph, it was not a disaster, it was something quieter, a warning. It revealed what happens when human ambition reaches a place science does not yet understand. It showed that endurance alone is not enough, that preparation, humility, and psychological resilience are as critical as strength. And it proved something no one had proven before, that humans could survive an Antarctic winter. But survival would come at a cost that could not be measured in miles, data, or dates, only in what the ice takes and never gives back. Thank you for watching until the end. If you want to continue exploring forgotten expeditions, human endurance, and the thin line between survival and collapse, consider subscribing to the channel. More files remain unopened, and many stories are still waiting to be told.